When an update is described as crucial by the very team that introduces it, expectations automatically become a double-edged sword. And that's exactly the case with Ferrari, which chose the Red Bull Ring to launch the updated version of the SF25's floor, presenting it as a technical turning point. But just minutes after the end of the first 2 free practice sessions in Austria, one question echoed through the paddock. Has anything really changed? Or is this yet another failed attempt to cover up the structural weaknesses of a fundamentally flawed project? This development package wasn't improvised. On the contrary, according to reports coming out of Maranello, the idea of a deep revision to the floor was already on the table just 4 races into the season. Why so soon? Because it quickly became clear that the SF25, as ambitious as its design might be, simply wasn't delivering as promised. In particular, the radical decision to use a pull rod suspension at the front instead of a push rod brought with it a series of complications that limited the car's setup flexibility and compromised aerodynamic stability. Ferrari's core concept was clear: maximize aerodynamic downforce from the floor. But pushing this philosophy to the extreme exposed a structural mismatch with the rear suspension, which proved too weak to support the generated loads. The result? A car that often and aggressively scrapes the track, severely wearing down the floor and damaging race performance. A well-known and serious issue, one that even led to Leclerc's disqualification in China due to excessive plank wear. From that point on, Ferrari found itself trapped in an incredibly narrow setup window. Either you push for performance and risk the floor, or you preserve the floor and sacrifice competitiveness. A dangerous game, and in the long run, an unsustainable one. That's why the long-awaited update finally arrived in Austria, not just to improve pace over a single lap, but more importantly, to make the SF25 more predictable, more manageable, more normal. According to the team, the new floor doesn't change the car's DNA, which already raises some eyebrows, but it should improve handling consistency, especially in medium to high-speed corners. But as is often the case, that theory has yet to translate into reality, at least for now. The Red Bull Ring, with its short corners and hard braking zones, is the perfect testing ground to measure the effectiveness of a technical change. Traction and tire temperature management are critical on a track like this, and Ferrari was hoping the new configuration would give them a meaningful boost in these key areas. But then came the lap times. Norris first, Leclerc 5th, Hamilton 10th. And with Mercedes and Ferrari seemingly behind McLaren, doubts exploded. What was this update really worth? Lewis Hamilton, never one to mince words, was crystal clear. They did an enormous job to bring the floor, but it didn't necessarily change our competitiveness. A comment that, if you read between the lines, feels more like disappointment than a neutral observation. Indeed, the 7-time world champion had a day to forget. Gearbox issues in the first session, only 1 lap completed before the failure, and an emergency gearbox change between FP1 and FP2, all to end up nearly a full second off the pace. Hardly the weekend he was hoping for, neither for himself nor for Ferrari, which now shares the harsh reality of still playing catch-up, even on update day. Leclerc fared slightly better, but he too was 6/10 behind Norris. Has Ferrari improved? Maybe, but not enough to be considered a serious contender for victory again. And that's the real problem. When you spend 4 races developing a car, pour millions into testing at the factory, and show up on track, just to gain half a tenth? In an F1 where everything moves by hundredths of a second, that might seem acceptable. But for a team that promised to fight for the title, it's simply unacceptable. Meanwhile, Red Bull is quietly working on invisible updates, like micro fins on the floor edge. And McLaren is revolutionizing the geometry of the rear suspension to widen the tire's operating window. Ferrari, instead, is clinging to small steps. Small, but not enough. The reality is that Ferrari still lacks a truly integrated vision between design, development, and weekend execution. The new floor, while a tangible sign of reaction, exposed an uncomfortable truth. There is no quick fix when a car's fundamental concept is flawed. Fred Vasseur's comments over the weekend were cautious, perhaps too cautious. No promises, no explosive statements, just the idea that we're heading in the right direction. But in Formula One, the right direction isn't enough. You also need speed. And that brings us to an even more delicate issue: the fragility of the SF25 project, a car that requires constant compromises just to function. Compromises that, in today's hyper-competitive environment, come at a high price. Red Bull and McLaren are evolving their cars with surgical precision, targeting specific details that yield real performance gains on track. Ferrari, on the other hand, still seems busy patching up structural weaknesses. Meanwhile, over at Mercedes, Hamilton is showing signs of frustration too. After a gearbox change and a lukewarm second session, he made it clear that the problem isn't the quality of the team's work. It's the direction things are heading. "We're close. A tenth can make the difference," he said. But then he added a weighty sentence: "We won't be in front." A bitter realization that perfectly describes the current situation for both of F1's former powerhouses. But while Mercedes can still rely on a solid technical package and a well-oiled development structure, Ferrari seems to be stuck in a technical and emotional limbo. Hopeful weekends alternate with sudden collapses, solid sessions are followed by inexplicable failures. And when instability becomes the norm, even driver talent gets suffocated. In this context, it's worth noting that Charles Leclerc is showing growing maturity, perhaps driven by the awareness that every opportunity counts in a career where the train may only pass once. But is that enough? No, because today's Formula One doesn't reward talent in isolation. It rewards systems. And right now, Ferrari's system is still struggling to stand on two legs. The changes brought to the Red Bull ring are a step, but not the kind of step that scares opponents. It's not the revolution that reshuffles the deck. It's an attempt to put a bandage on a wound that risks tearing wider. And for those who know the history of the Scuderia, this is a worrying sign. Not because of a lack of potential, but because of the lack of courage to start over from scratch when it's needed. And perhaps now is that time. At the same time, the situation at Red Bull and McLaren is entirely different. The team from Milton Keynes continues playing hide-and-seek with its updates, introducing small, almost invisible changes, but always effective. McLaren, on the other hand, is enjoying a kind of technical second youth, with targeted changes to the suspension finally making the MCL38 more docile and consistent. Norris's confident driving and dominance in free practice are clear signs of this. In short, the Austrian weekend quickly became a psychological testing ground as well. The numbers say Ferrari hasn't collapsed, but it hasn't risen either. Expectations were high, maybe too high, and the gap to the top remains tangible. And when even Hamilton, who isn't even directly involved in Ferrari's development, signals disappointment, maybe it's time for Maranello to take a real look in the mirror. Now the question is, what will happen in the upcoming races? Will there be more changes? More crucial updates? Or are we about to witness a slow acceptance of the current status quo, while hoping for miracles the racetrack rarely delivers? One thing is certain: if Ferrari truly wants to return to the top, it must stop chasing patchwork solutions and start building a stable, evolving, and coherent technical concept. And it needs to do it fast. Thank you for reading all the way through. If you enjoyed this analysis, leave a comment below with your thoughts on this Ferrari transformation, and tell us whether you believe it will be enough to close the gap to Red Bull and McLaren. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates from the world of Formula One. Click on the video currently on your screen to continue the journey with us. See you there.